Hello, everybody. Today I have a talk with Betty Martin from Seattle. She's a sexological body worker, and I recently attended one of her workshops in Prague. And since then, I really have to admit my life has changed in many ways. And it's great to have the opportunity to have a talk with you tonight. So, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're in England right now?
I'm in England right now. Yes, I live in
Yeah.
Seattle in the US, and I've been on a tour this summer teaching in several different places. Yeah.
Yes, and your work is really very rich, and even after the workshop it's very hard for me to describe your work, and also the term sexological body worker is not very common to many people here in Europe, so
Right.
maybe you can explain a bit what your work is about.
Sure. Well, it's true that I have training in sexological body work, but I was already working for 10 years before I got that one. So that was a more recent thing. Um, for 20, 30 years, I was a chiropractor. So I had my hands on people all day long. And then 20 years ago, in my mid 40s, I began to experiment with what is my own eroticism? What is my own sexuality? Who am I? How does this work? And uh, with a few friends who were also taking some workshops at that time, I dove into, well, who am I in this way? What does this mean? And, how does this whole thing work? And so that was a major path for me for a number of years. And I had already been doing body work with people. I had already been doing teaching counseling with people. I had been doing body mind neurological integration stuff with people. So it was very holistic already. And then when I went on this journey for my own eroticism, then after some years of that, I realized I was ready to add that to what I was already offering.
Hmm.
So I closed my chiropractic office and I opened a different office doing sex coaching. One word that's used for that often is sacred intimate, which was a term coined in California some years ago. But a sacred intimate basically means that I interact with you so that you can have experiences of your own sexuality and eroticism, so you learn about you. Um, and so what actually happens in sessions can be quite varied. It may be body work, it may be talking, it may be interactive, it may be clothed, it may not be clothed. There's a huge range. And so I did that for a number of years. Later, I took the sexological bodywork class because why not? It's there, it's
Hmm.
available. Um, but I'd already been doing it for some years, so it wasn't particularly new. But it was a good class. And it has connected me with people all over the world who are also doing sexological body work. And so the community there has been quite wonderful. And so you're asking me, what is sexological body work? Um, when you go to a body worker, a massage therapist, or something like that, they may be doing very powerful and wonderful healing work with you, but they're not going to go into a sexual realm and they're not going to be touching your genitals. It's just not allowed. But there are times when you actually need the kind of help that might include touching genitals or working with sexual arousal. And that's where sexological body workers are trained in that so that they can um, guide you through experiences that are useful for you,
Yeah.
that they're not about sex in terms of, they're not about hooking up, they're not about, you know, quote, having sex, but they are for you to learn about your body and you to learn about your feelings and gain skills. Um, and they are one way only. The practitioner is doing body work with the client. It's not like a sex work where the action is going both ways. It's a very therapeutic setting.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So that's what sexological body work is.
Yeah, and I realized that your range of work is really very broad. There are many things flowing together.
Yeah.
And what I liked in the workshop is the way you created a sex-positive attitude in the room and within the group. And of course, there were many people who are already working with sex. And you also referred to them as sex workers. You said, like, I don't care if you're a tantra masseuse, if you are a sex coach, if you're a sacred intimate. We are all sex workers. And this is a term that's very positive. And then you recommended a book that's called The Sacred Prostitute, which for me turned around this term of prostitution, which has mostly a negative connotations for most of the people. So can you explain a bit how sexuality became for you such a positive thing, and also this term prostitution is something that doesn't have to be something bad.
Right.
Or even sacred.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's quite a lot. That's quite an answer. I mean, there's a lot in that question. It was through my own personal exploring what my own eroticism was that changed that for me. And it was a very personal journey. I didn't have anything in mind about offering it to anyone else. It's a very personal journey. But after I had been doing that for some years, I realized that I did have something to offer to other people. And I recognized that I wanted to do that. And it's a calling. It's like, people go into the ministry, or people go into medicine, or people go into psychotherapy, or, some way of serving people that means something to me and that I have skill in. So in that way, it's a calling. And it's very clear to me, working with clients, how much they're learning and how much they're healing and how much they're growing. And there's no question that it's good for them. So that's part of what changed it around. Also, what changed it for me was meeting a number of people who were doing the traditional form of sex work or prostitution, or in the States we call it escort work. Who were just really great people and doing really good things with their clients, and that was an eye-opener for me at the time. And at some point I realized, oh, this is me. These are my people. These are people who are doing what I want to do, which is to help people and guide people through erotic experiences. Because there are things that you learn with sexuality that you learn nowhere else.
Yeah.
And that's the way it is. And there are things, there's things that you can learn alone, certainly. And there are things that you can learn with your partner, of course. And hopefully you are. But there are things that a professional can guide you through that there's no substitute for, because I'm not your partner. I don't bring my own needs into the interaction. I'm here to serve you, and that changes everything. So that's how I came into it. The word prostitution is an interesting word. In the U.S., at any rate, it's often used to mean basically you're selling something that should not be sold. And so one use of it obviously is in sexual services, but it's also used for people who are selling, prostituting themselves to the banks or the oil companies, or, in some other way to their businesses that have nothing to do with sex. It just means you're selling something. So working for a bank, for example, you may be selling your integrity in order to keep the money coming in. And so it's called that you're prostituting yourself.
So it's about dignity.
So it's about selling something that ought not to be sold. And most people put sex in that category. Well, you're selling sex and that ought not to be sold, so therefore we're calling it prostitution. And of course, that's an appropriate word legally. But And sadly, there are many people in prostitution who really don't want to be there, but they're desperate financially, so they're there. And there are many, many other people who are like myself, who are there because we love it, we want to be there, we see it as a calling and as a service, um, and I do realize that not everyone has as many options as I do, and as many of us do. Um, so, unfortunately, it's a legal gray area because even though we're engaging in sexual activity, most laws in the states will say sexual uh, contact for gratification. And is it for gratification? I don't know. Is it for learning? Yeah. Is there a difference? Yeah, and not always. And so it's it's not easy dealing with the law aspect of it.
Yeah, it's it's really wonderful the way you describe it, because also after spending time with you, it completely changed my mind, and I found out about my own judgments considering this kind
Mm-hmm.
of work in some
Mm-hmm.
ways. And that kind of leads to my next question, because for a few years, me and my wife are in the Tantra scene once in a while, and did some workshops and
Mm-hmm.
read lots of books and had our
Mm-hmm.
experiences. And sometimes I also feel within this scene there's a lot of judgment about
Mm-hmm.
sexuality. For example, if a man wants to go to a tantra massage for personal growth or
Right.
going deep or whatever, then that's kind of seen more evolved than a man who just wants to have a short massage and a hand job. Massage with a happy ending.
Oh
And with you,
yeah.
I had the feeling that
Yeah.
both of those men, both of those wishes are equally valued, and
Absolutely.
that really took a lot of judgment off myself,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
sometimes we have desires and wishes in one way
Yeah.
or in another way.
Right.
And within the setting of the workshop, I felt so much relief that
Yeah.
everything that is there is okay.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, maybe you play tennis or basketball. And why? You play tennis because it's fun. It feels good. It's good for you. Lots of reasons. What if playing tennis was looked down upon? Then you wouldn't be able to just go play tennis. You'd have to pretend that it was for some purpose of his enlightenment. Well, I play conscious tennis. I don't play ordinary tennis. I play conscious tennis so that it's, building my consciousness or something. Yeah.
Yeah.
It is true that we can approach any activity. You can approach brushing your teeth as just getting the job done. You can approach brushing your teeth as a spiritual practice. You can approach anything with the intention of learning more about yourself, becoming more conscious, more aware, becoming a better person. Doesn't any activity, you can approach it any particular way you want to. And it's also true that sex is particularly prone to a kind of desperation and, oh my gosh, I have to get some, I have to get there, and if I don't, it's it's understandable given our cultural setting that that's sometimes the case, and it's unfortunate. Um, so it is true that one can approach sex in a very, you know, same old, boring, desperate way, or one can approach sexual activity with a different attitude of wanting to learn more about yourself, wanting to become more aware. Of course, there's that difference. But it doesn't mean that one of them is better than the other. I think what happens, and I'm about to get on my preacher's stand here. I think what happens is that we grow up in a society in which sex is considered suspect or bad. Pleasure is bad, it's a little suspect, and the whole body is bad, basically, and this spiritual idea is good. And
Yeah.
so we have this dichotomy. I can't see my hand. We have this dichotomy where, or this polarity where, okay, body is bad, spirit is good. Well, we're all raised in it. And then we discover Tantra or something like that. And so we still do the same thing. Spiritual sex is good. Plain old ordinary sex is bad.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's the same thing. And so, yeah, I don't hold that. I don't hold that dichotomy. Um, there's something to be learned, yes. And if you want to become more aware, yes, you can. But it doesn't mean that just having sex for the fun of it suddenly becomes lower or less important or bad. No. Yeah.
Yes.
So, yeah.
I think that's really important to be aware of, and sometimes just brushing your teeth is fine.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I did have a friend say, um, all the sacred sexuality and tantra teachings about, oh, we have to bring the energy up and get into our upper chakra. She said what most of us need is to get into the lower ones
Yes.
and get really grounded and discover our messy beast. That's where we learn something. um, and I tend to agree with her. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
thank you on that.
Yeah.
And then there's something about your work. You created a model, like something that's called the wheel of consent,
Mm-hmm.
and might take a long time to explain it in detail, but as far as I understood it, it's about the difference of giving and receiving, and taking and allowing, and why it is important to take these ones apart.
Mm-hmm.
And since my wife and we work with men and women and also couples, I'd be interested if you realized any differences between men and women within your work with the wheel of
Mm-hmm.
consent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have actually. The
Especially with the polarities of taking and allowing.
Yeah, yeah. Let's see how long we have. A couple hours. um, the Wheel of Consent. You can get all about it on my website, bettymartin.org. So I won't explain it all here, but it is as you just said. It's about when I'm touching you. I'm either touching you the way you want, or I'm touching you the way I want. And what's the difference between those two? And likewise, when you're touching me, you're either touching me for me the way I want, or you're touching me for your pleasure the way you want. And it turns out that if you can take those four apart so that you can be 100% in each of them, then you find out what they are, and each of those four teaches you something different about yourself. Each of those four will challenge you in different ways, and each of those is enjoyable and wonderful in different ways. Each of those is sexy in different ways. Each of them has different kinds of insights for you. And so the wheel of consent is a practice in, can I be in this one? 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 Can I tell the difference between them? And it's not always easy. Some people some people can take a lot of support in sort of finding out, oh, this is what this one feels like. Oh, I feel it now. And so it varies by the person, but you can get all that on my website. Your question about, have I noticed some differences in men and women? Yes, I have. And here's what I'll say about that. First of all, each of those four quadrants is accessible and needed by every single person. whether you are a man or a woman, a male or female, transgender, whatever, you deserve time in all four of those. There's no such thing as this is the masculine one, this is the feminine one. No. Every human being is capable of all four of those and needs all four of them. So that's one thing. The other thing is that the moment we're born and our parents and others take a look at our genitals and decide, oh, that's a girl, that's a boy, then you're put on this path of how you are raised and what is expected of you. And those expectations have a huge effect on the way you think, the way you move your body, what feelings you're allowed to have, what sensations in your body you're allowed to pursue, what you're allowed to enjoy, how you're allowed to express yourself, all kinds of ways. And to a certain degree, you are punished if you don't abide by that. For example, it's okay for girls to talk like this. But if you see a man talking like this, there's going to be backlash and a problem. So just those very simple things all across life. So what happens in the wheel is that in one of the quadrants, called the Taking Quadrant, you are touching the way you want to touch. You're not touching for the other person's benefit, which means that the natural expression and desire to move and touch, I mean, of course we all have that. We're born with it. Every small child has it, but we're learned to shut it down. It's very often that men will have a harder time finding that experience than women do. And I believe it doesn't have to do with, men don't have any fewer nerve endings in their hands than women do. You have just as many nerve endings. You have just as many brain cells. So it has nothing to do with actually being a male person.
Yeah.
It has to do with the way that little boys are taught not to enjoy sensation. It's a little girl can get away with feeling a nice piece of velvet. Oh, that feels good. Let a little boy try that and he'll get in trouble. Yeah.
Yeah.
So boys are taught not to trust or pay attention to physical sensation and pleasure. So it makes it harder for adult men to find that. Once they do, though, there's very often this big relief and a big aha of, oh my gosh, I didn't even know this existed. And it's oh my gosh, it's a whole new world. That's always wonderful to see. The other thing that happens is that men are taught from an early age that they are bad, they're predators, they're not safe, and their sexuality, they're supposed to have a lot of sexuality, but they're also, there's a lot of shame put on the top of it, like, you're a predator and you're dangerous and keep it in your pants.
Yes, that was the example I wanted to give you from my own experience.
Yeah.
That I realized that sometimes it's really hard to take my space and take what I want because of all this collective guilt that's on the man's shoulders, because all the things we did to women in human history. So I think that's a reason that I cannot really 100% connect with this power and really go for it. Exactly. So what can we do? What can men do about that?
Yeah. Also, what happens is that the wheel of consent is about consent and agreement, and if your partner is saying, yes, I give you the gift of my body to play with as you want, and you've set a limit, you can play with me in this way but not this way, and so you are enjoying yourself, there's a gift there. your partner is giving you a gift. And there's a limit to what you can do, of course, what they're allowing you to do. And so it's a gift and it's an agreement. If you don't understand that agreement, then you fear that you are going to harm them or hurt them or take too much or use or abuse them. And nobody wants to do that. It's a terrible feeling. And so oftentimes men will just step very gently into that taking quadrant and feel like, oh my gosh, this is terrible, this is wrong. Now I'm a perpetrator, I can't be trusted. All that fear comes up because you don't quite understand the agreement piece. And it's perfectly natural, it's cultural conditioning, it's very understandable. And the way your question about, well, what can men do about it? You ask for permission. May I feel your hand? May I feel your leg? May I play with your hair? May I touch your face? You ask permission that starts with may I. And you ask for things that are not very sexy so that you gain confidence that your partner will be honest with you about whether it's okay. You start with something small. So that's very common. That's probably the biggest difference for men and women.
So in this process, it needs lots of communication.
Yep.
Lots of talking about boundaries, about wishes, desires.
Yeah.
So that's the thing that all the couples therapists say. It needs lots of really heart-to-heart communication.
Yeah.
So there's no way around that.
Nobody really tells you how.
Yeah.
Well, except in my work, we tell you how. Yes, there's no way around it. There's no way around it.
Because there's this cliche that men don't talk so much and women like to talk more. But it's really about finding a way of communication that fits for you to have these clear agreements and consent.
Yeah. And the 3-minute game that the Wheel of Consent is based on, it makes that very easy, but it's extremely simple.
And it's fun.
It's very fun. Yeah. Well, your question about women, there's an equal dynamic on the other side. Men are taught that they're supposed to take, but they're also terrified of taking because they don't want to be that guy, the perpetrator, the bad guy. Yeah. So there's a lot of confusion there. Women are taught ever since we're little girls to be nice and go along with things that people want to do to us because that's just what we're supposed to do. And we're supposed to keep the men happy and not speak up, because if we speak up, then we're criticized for being, too tough or ball busters or demasculating or all kinds of nonsense. Yeah. So girls are taught to go along and will tend to, it depends on individuals, of course, but on average, women will tend to go along with things that they are not really that interested in because they don't want to make a wave or don't want to hurt their man's feelings or something. And it varies, of course, different situations and different people, but that's a very general tendency. And so that's the shadow or the outside of the allowing quadrant. I can allow you. I can say, yes, help yourself. You can play with me. You can feel me up, whatever. These are my limits. You can do this, but not this. And it's a gift. But if I don't know how to say no, and I just go along with everything, that's not a gift.
Yeah.
And for many women, for many people, every experience of touch feels like, well, something's happening and I'm going along with it. And almost all women will identify with that experience of, yeah, I've put up with stuff I didn't want. Why? I didn't want to make waves. I didn't want to make the guy mad. Wanted to keep him happy, blah, blah, blah. Well, most women can identify with that.
So in this dynamic, I guess it's a lot about trust, and we all had feelings or situations in our life where trust was broken. So I guess it's
Yeah.
kind of hard to rebuild this trust, and it takes some steps and lots of honest work. And there are these two or more levels of trust. There's the trust I put in another person, and
Mm-hmm.
then there's this trust I have to trust myself. And then
Yes.
even maybe a broader perspective where I say I have to trust life itself.
Yeah.
How do you think they are related to each other, like trusting another person and trusting myself? Do I have to trust myself to trust another person? And how important is trust in your work?
Oh, that's a good question. When it comes to touch, the person you need to trust is yourself. I can say, well, Manuel, he's a good guy. He's not going to hurt me. So therefore, I can trust him. But what am I trusting you to do? Read my mind?
Mm-hmm.
No, that would be silly. Yeah. Or I can say, well, I should trust myself and just dive in. But that's also silly. If I have the skill to swim, I can trust the water and I can trust myself in the water. If I do not have the skill to swim, and I say, well, I should just be more trusting, and I jump in, I'm going to drown.
Yeah.
Like the point is not to trust yourself. The point is to become trustworthy, is to learn to swim. Then you'll automatically trust yourself. And so in the wheel, the practice of the wheel, you learn the basic skills of noticing what your limits are and trusting them and communicating them and speaking up when you need to speak up. When you have those skills, or to the degree that you have those skills, you will become trustworthy.
Mm-hmm.
You won't abandon yourself, and then you will trust yourself. And then you relax because you're not worried about what's going to happen next. If I'm unable to say no, I'm going to be very worried about what you ask for or what you do. If I'm capable of saying no, I don't have to worry about what you ask for because I'll say no. It's not a problem.
So you have the
So we
experience
have
that.
to trust ourselves. We have to become trustworthy. Then we trust ourselves. And then you relax. You can
Yeah.
handle anything. Yeah.
And you have the experience that this trust can be learned, even though people might be hurt or have an issue with trust because they are molested or other severe things happen to them
Sure.
during their lives. So is that the experience with the people that come to your workshop or your
Yeah.
clients, that
Yeah.
this trust can be built, that it's not something
Well, yeah.
when you lose it, it's gone?
No. You build the skill
Mm-hmm.
so that you can speak up for yourself. That's what you build. I don't have to trust you. I have to trust me. And in order to trust me, I have to develop the skill so that I can be trusted. When I have the skill to speak up for myself, say yes, no, then I can trust myself.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have to worry about trusting you. You're not a problem. I mean, unless you pull a knife on me, like, you're not a problem. What most people think of when they say trust the other person is that I trust the other person will not do anything that upsets me. Well, there's a problem with that. It's impossible. There's no way that you can know how I want to be touched at every moment. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
And so if I abandon myself and think that I have to trust you, I'm expecting you to know, but I haven't communicated it. No one wins that situation. And I have been there, and I don't ever care to go back there. Yeah, I
Yeah.
imagine most people have been there.
Yeah. And
So the people talk about, learning to trust again. There are many things that you should not trust. You're very smart not to trust. So, and having people read your mind is one of those. If you live in most places, you lock your door at night. Is it because you don't trust? No, it's because you have good sense.
Yeah.
So trust is one of those ideas in sort of new age thought that, oh, it's all groovy, we should all trust each other. Hell no.
Yeah.
Don't be ridiculous.
I was just about to
Yeah,
mention that it's
gain
something
some
like
skills.
we should always trust, otherwise we're not trusting enough.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No,
and not
that's
open enough.
ridiculous. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's ridiculous. You need to learn some skills. Then you will be trustworthy. Then you will trust yourself. Then you will relax and have a lot more fun. That it works. That's the direction it works.
And I think that's also what your work is about, empowerment and choice and learning skills. And I was asking myself, when it's a lot about empowerment, like being in my power, having a choice, feeling my boundaries, say no, say yes. What if times in life are experienced where we have the feeling we have no choice? Does these skills help us also in these situations, or is it about letting go and surrender? So how do these two
that's a good
areas in life play with each other?
Well, I can tell you what I have learned. How much choice we actually have in life is a philosophical question that is beyond the scope of this call. However, I can tell you that as I have learned to take more responsibility for myself, which means I make choices and don't blame other people for them. I make choices about how I am touched instead of blaming you for not doing it right? The more I make choices about myself, the more I notice that there are many places in life where I have more choices than I used to think I did. For example, you might say, well, I am going down the highway, I get a speeding ticket, the policeman pulls me over, I don't have a choice, I have to stop. Actually, you do have a choice. You could keep going. The consequences are bad enough that I don't recommend it. But you do have a choice there. There's a hurricane coming. That you don't have a choice about. But you have a choice about whether to put boards over your windows, whether to stay in your house, whether to evacuate. You have a lot of choices. You go to a restaurant. There's things on the menu that you can't eat or are not good or whatever. You say, well, I don't have a choice. I have to stay here. All my friends are here. You do have a choice. You can have a conversation with your friends about moving. Or you could not eat. You could leave. I mean, you have lots of choices.
So the problem is that we don't feel we have a choice.
You don't feel like you have a choice, but you actually have much more choice than you realize you do. And, a lot of political activism is based on this, realizing that most people think, well, the right now in the United States, there's a big movement happening to protect a river through North Dakota from an oil pipeline going through. Well, you could say, well, we don't have any choice. They're going to build it there, blah, blah, blah. Or you stand up and say, no, you cannot have this river. And pretty soon you have 3,000 people there saying, no, we have a choice. You do not get to have our river. So, yeah, we have much more choice than we often admit. Sometimes the alternatives are sufficiently awful that we choose the least awful alternative. That happens sometimes. But that's what I've noticed from working with this for a while, is that, yeah, I have more choice than I used to notice I did, and I have to take responsibility for that myself. I don't get to blame you for it anymore. And that's where it gets hard. It's much easier to blame you than saying to myself, oh, I made a choice here. What did I choose?
So yeah. it's like we have to try to dive deeper below the surface and
Yeah.
be aware that we actually have a choice, or even we take a choice, or
Yeah.
avoid the choice, and be
Right.
honest to ourselves
Yeah.
that we don't like to bear the consequences of our choices.
Exactly. Sure. Oh yeah. Yes. I'm sorry, but that's really true. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
a hard one.
It's a hard one. And that's why I say have said oftentimes that the wheel of consent has become a practice in integrity for me and for many people, because I can no longer pretend that it's your fault. I can no longer pretend that I'm doing this for you if I'm actually doing it for me. I can no longer pretend that I don't care about what happens, because I do care about what happens. Um, yeah, so it's been a real practice in integrity besides
Yeah.
being fun.
So
Yeah.
we're back to integrity, authenticity,
Mhm.
and empowerment again.
Yeah. Yeah.
Really standing tall and strong for myself, and
Yeah.
and yeah, and deal with the wind that blows against our faces.
Yeah. There's an American writer who says the worst kind of disempowerment is not knowing that you have the power that you actually have. Yeah. And that applies to many areas, and it definitely applies to touch. How many times we just go along with what's happening because we don't really know how to choose what we actually want. Um, and when you learn it in such a tangible way with touch, with someone who's safe, like your partner, then you learn it in a lot of other ways in your life as well. Yeah.
You know, that's also my experience doing lots of coachings, and I always come back to one special question, which is, what do you actually want?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And sometimes it seems so obvious what we want, but
Right.
when we really have more choices, we
Yeah.
find out that it's actually not so easy
Yeah.
to know what we really want
True.
and who
True.
we are deep inside
Oh, yeah.
and where we want to go.
That is a lifelong
Journey.
question. Yeah. Lifelong
Yeah.
journey.
And you are supporting people on their way on this journey. And let me ask you a last question.
Yeah.
What do you think is special about your work? What do people appreciate about your work that makes it so successful? You're touring through Europe, you have lots of workshops back in the
Mm-hmm.
States.
Mm-hmm.
And connected with this question, what do you think, if people are interested in personal growth and exploring their sexuality and intimacy, what should they look out for uh, when they are looking for somebody working with them? So what's the skill in a practitioner that you really should look out for?
Well, that's a good one. I think the reason people are very excuse me, that people are very excited about this work is because we all have had so much confusion about consent and asking for what we want and getting mixed up about who it's for. And I think that's why it has meant so much to me. Because I have been on both sides of it, and we teach what we need to learn, and I've been very confused. So, and I think that's why people are really picking it up.
Yeah.
Excuse me. And I think if you're going to work with a practitioner of any kind, it's best to have, well, part of it is kind of by instinct. You choose someone that you feel safe with, but the conversation that you have with them, I would ask them how they teach consent and empowerment, and make sure, how I would ask them, how do you make sure that you don't do more than I'm ready for? That would be the question.
Yeah.
How do you make sure that you don't do more than I'm ready for?
And,
yeah, that's.
and,
I got a couple minutes here. I need to go.
And this question might especially be important for women.
Yes, I think it's important for everyone, but it will be it's very often easier for women to get overwhelmed by doing too much. But men are not immune. One of the clients I had who was the most terrified happened to be a man. I mean, it's everybody. Women are probably more often aware of it. I don't know. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So before I say goodbye to you, I would like to mention that you are writing a book at the moment.
I am.
Yeah, and when will it be out?
I expect it out in about a year, summer, fall of 2017.
And it's about the wheel of consent?
It's about the wheel of consent. It's about how to play with it, what it teaches you, how it challenges you. Yeah.
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 Yeah, and if people don't want to wait a year, they can go on your webpage. There's a lot of free stuff about the Wheel of Consent, lots of videos where you can learn lots of things.
Yeah, lots of free stuff.
Yeah, you are giving workshops around the world. So I would like people to check out your work.
Thank you.
And I'd be happy to see you on your next Europe
Thank
tour.
you. It's great meeting you.
Yeah.
And if you're a follower of Manuel, you will certainly be hearing about the book, I imagine.
Yes, yes. I will let people know, of course.
Great.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you for this interview.
Yeah, thanks for the talk.
You're welcome.
Have a great rest of the tour.
Thank you. See you next year.
Europe.
Okay.
See you, Betty.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.